Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Expert Talks. I'm John Dickinson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts, and this is the third of our Expert Talks online series. Previously, we've talked about Chaos Days. We've talked about the Top Gun Guide to DevOps, so quite DevOps and operability heavy topics. Today, we are moving into some more software development practices, and Abraham is going to share some more information on how to use pull requests, and how to effectively use them, rather. And that's especially relevant today when, in the current circumstances, when remote pairing or pairing can be a little more of a challenge. So what we're going to do for the talk is Abraham will go all the way through the talk. While he's talking, if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A panel, the box with the speech quotes, and we will Abraham will take the questions at the end, and then we'll have a period of, if you see a question that comes up and you really want to see that answered, then give it a thumbs up, and the questions that float to the top of the Q&A panel will be the first ones to be answered, and we'll take them in that order. So that's how we're going to run the session. I will hand over to Abraham now, and I'll leave you in his capable hands.
Thank you, John. Well, welcome everyone. Let me start by slightly introducing myself a little bit. I know you can see my face, but I'd like to show you this, which is what I usually look like normally. Due to the lockdown and some of the circumstances, I haven't been able to have a haircut for about 4 months, which is why I look a bit like Frodo Baggins right now, but this is not normal. We need to know this is usually I look like a more respectable person. Anyway, jokes aside, I am mostly a software developer, as in that's what I do most of the time in my day-to-day. I'm a practitioner. But also I do public speaking like this, and I am also an author. I've done a few things. The most recent books that I've collaborated with are these two. You can find them online. You can buy a copy. You can not buy a copy if you don't want to, that's fine. There are also things that I've done, but they were a bit longer ago. But if you're interested, you could check online. If you Google my name, you'll probably find a few things. So that's me. About the talk today, this is what I'd like to go through. First of all, I'd like to start all my talks with the why. For me, it's very important to mention not just what we're doing, but why we're doing, the reason behind everything. And then, very simple, we're just going to talk about how to craft a good pull request, and then we're going to talk about how to review how to do a good review of a pull request. And finally, we'll just go over some conclusions. So, why are pull requests? There is a question that I get a lot, and in fact, if you go around, if you check the internet, etc., pull requests, they can be a bit of a controversial topic. Some people love them, some people hate them. So it's important to know why we're doing this. Now, many people say you shouldn't do pull requests, you should do pair programming. Well, I agree, pair programming is great. In fact, why stopping there? Mob programming, that's even better. You get everyone sharing ideas, learning from each other, etc. And under normal circumstances, this is what I would advise. However, these are not normal circumstances. We are not, or most of us at least, are not in the office, which means this is an environment that is not currently possible right now. So how about remote pairing? Well, that's a possibility. However, if you want to do remote pairing effectively, there are a few things that you need to take into consideration. First, you need the right tools. And by this, I mean, for instance, you need an effective way to share your screen in an interactive manner. And the interactive point is very important because there are many tools out there that allow you to share your screen for somebody else to see. But that's not pairing, really. In a pairing session, both people are interacting with the code. If you just share your screen, there is one person interacting with the code and another person just looking. That's not really pairing, that's a work shadow. What kind of tools do you have there to do this? Well, you have Screen SO, still in beta, but pretty good, and it lets you do just that. You can do interactive pair programming. Everyone can touch the code at the same time. And if you want to try it out, this is the perfect moment because they're giving away for free while the current situation lasts. So if there is something you are considering, go ahead, try it. Another thing you have to take into account, good quality headphones. And not just for pair programming, actually for any kind of communication that you do with other people with your laptop, you need some good quality headphones because yes, laptops, computers, these days they come with microphones and speakers, but the quality is not that good. And if you want to have a fluid conversation with someone, you need one of these. Okay, but well, probably many of you already have one of these because we like to listen to our music or because we commute and it's very noisy and we don't want to hear the noise. So maybe you have one of these already. Great. Okay, what else do you need? You need a good broadband connection. And here is where it gets tricky because if we are working from home, then we are using residential broadband connection, and residential broadband connection is asymmetric. This is a test that I did myself at home, and I can see that my download is pretty good, but my upload is just shy of 10 megabits. And now, if I am doing a pair programming session or a video conference or anything like that with another person, communication needs to be bidirectional, which means the other person can only receive data at the speed that I send it, and vice versa, which means my 100 megabit connection suddenly turns into a 10 megabit connection, which is not that good. And another challenge is we are working from home, but from a crowded home, right? It's not, if you are sharing your flat or if you're living with your partner, that means probably they're working from home too. As an example, my wife is a teacher. She's now doing all her lessons online. And when she's in a lesson and I'm in a video conference, at the same time, I can tell that the connection sometimes struggles a little bit because there's too much audio and video coming in back and forth. So let's say you manage to get all those. There are still all the things that you need to take into account when you're doing remote pairing. One of them is the communication style. For instance, if you are pairing in person, you're actually communicating in several different ways, right? You have, of course, your verbal communication. These are the words that you say, the words that you exchange with your partner. You have your non-verbal auditory communication, right? This is when you don't use words, but you make sounds. So when you go, huh, or when you go, or, huh, that kind of thing, it's not a word, but it's still a message that you're sharing with your partner to catch their attention. And then finally, you have your non-auditory communication. These are the facial gestures. This is when you turn to look at them. This is when you raise your eyebrows, when you open your mouth. All these gestures, they are ways to communicate with your partner that you have in person. However, when you are working remotely, yes, you have your verbal communication. Yes, you have your non-verbal auditory communication, but you lose the non-auditory communication, which means you need to adapt your communication style, taking into account that you are able to communicate through a fewer amount of signals. But well, again, maybe this is something you can get used to. Just learn how to deal with the non-auditory communication, and you have a very effective remote pairing exercise. That's good. What else do you have? We have all the challenges. The first one is, again, these days, we're working from home, but it's not just us, right? Some people have children or other dependents, and those children are at home too. Now, pairing requires your full undivided attention. You need to be in constant communication with your pairing partner. If you have children at home, it's a bit difficult to keep 100% focus all the time because children sometimes require attention, which means you're going to have a lot of interruptions. It's going to make the pairing session a bit difficult. Then, of course, there is the age-old problem of time zones. What if you're trying to remote pair with people in different time zones? Then again, things get a bit tricky. Maybe you can only pair for a number of hours, but then during some of the hours, you need to work separately. And then finally, and this is not just a matter of the current lockdown, this is a general matter, how about flex time? For instance, let's say I typically work a normal office day, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 9 to 7, maybe even, something like that. But you know what? It's a nice sunny day. and then spending the entire day inside working. 6 p.m. when I finish, the sun is gone. How bad? Well, you know what? I much prefer if I have a long gap in the middle. Maybe I spend a couple of hours with my wife having a nice coffee out in the garden. And then instead of finishing at 6, I'd finish at 8 or 9 if I have to. Right? I can do that if I am free to manage my own time however I want. However, if I am pairing with someone else, it's not just me that I have to take into consideration. Right? There's another person, and that might make things a bit trickier. So what I'm trying to say with this is not that pairing is bad. Pairing is great. It's fantastic. I love it. Remote pairing, a little bit trickier, but possible, and you should try to do it if you want to. However, given all this, do not disregard pull requests very quickly, because pull requests, even though they might not be your first choice, they are a very, very useful tool to have in your belt. Now, like any tools, you need practice to be able to use them effectively. And this is where it comes. So let's start with crafting a pull request. The most important thing when you are preparing a pull request for someone else to review is empathy, right? I'm writing this in big, bold letters because it really is a key to success. And this is empathy towards the person that is going to review your pull request, right? That person is going to take your code, is going to take your changes, and is going to have to be able to understand what you try to do, what you try to achieve, and when you meant, right? So whenever we're creating a pull request, we need to make every effort to make it easy for that person to review the pull request. We do that by following 2 simple steps. First, we need to very clearly define the theme of our pull request. We need to very clearly define what our pull request is about. And then we need to tell the story of our changes in a nice, logical way. Let's start with the first one, the theme. The theme is typically the title of the pull request, something like this. This is from Spring Framework, right? It clearly indicates what you're trying to achieve. In this case, fix a race condition in this particular class. Okay, this is the first step to tell the reviewer what they're going to see. Now, this is usually quite easy to do because typically you're implementing a particular feature or you're fixing a bug. So the title of your match request is, I say match request, sorry. I usually work with these days with GitLab, and in GitLab the nomenclature is merge request instead of pull request. So I'm going to be using both terms interchangeably during the talk. I'll try to say pull request because I think that's a more common concept, but if I say merge request, please understand the same. Sorry, back to it. So yeah, the title of the pull request is going to define my theme, and it's typically going to be the bug that I'm trying to fix or the feature that I'm trying to implement. So that's going to be very easy to define. However, when we have clear what the theme is, we need to make sure to stick to it. So all the changes that I am including in my pull request have to be directly related to that theme. Because if I include changes that are not directly related to this theme, that's going to make it confusing for the reviewer. When the reviewer goes through the list of changes, they're going to see stuff and they're going to think, why are you doing this? I don't understand why you need this. So it's very important to reduce the amount of noise and to make it very clear for the reviewer that you stick to changes only directly related to the pull request. Now, if you've seen other talks of mine before, you might think that I'm contradicting myself because I usually encourage people to fix any problems as and when they see them. You see a bug, fix it. You see code that is hard to read, rewrite it. You see duplication, consolidate it, make it together. And now, however, I'm telling you, if it is not directly related to the theme of the pull request, do not include that change. Now, how do you consolidate those two things? How do you stick to the theme and at the same time follow, I'm a big fan of this, follow the Boy Scout rule. Always leave the campground cleaner than you found it. Now, the key is you still do all those improvements. However, you just don't include it in the pull request. You just release them later. So the idea is you would have your main pull request, in this case, add a flux capacitor, and then you will have your auxiliary pull request. And this is all the things that you found that you can improve, all the problems that you spotted, the warnings, the duplicated code, etc. And then you still make those changes, but you share them under different pull requests. And see how I didn't say to just do one additional pull request. You do as many as you have to, because each of those also have to have a very clear theme, right? You don't mix all the improvements in one. You don't do a pull request to say improvements. That doesn't help the reviewer build an expectation of what they're going to see. So you need to make sure that even your refactorings, even your improvements are some nicely crafted pull request under their own thing, okay? Now, sometimes this will be easy to do because all those improvements that you're doing, they are not strictly necessary to implement your feature. So you can do your feature, have it out, do the pull request, and then do all the improvements. Sometimes you will need those changes before you can implement your feature, right? For instance, you might need to fix a bug before you can do your own thing. So what happens then? It's okay to just switch the order of elements. Whoops. Sorry, my clicker is not working. Here. You just switch the order of elements. So maybe you do one first pull request that is just an improvement. Then you do your main pull request. And then you do the other pull request for the other improvements that you found. Now, you might be wondering yourself, how do I do this thing of I'm working on something and then I have to stop, go to a different pull request, etc. Well, if you're working with Git, you can do a Git stash. If you're working with anything else, your IDE probably has this option called shelf changes, which effectively works like if you haven't used it before, it basically checks, it gets all the changes that you may have in your code base at the moment, puts them away somewhere that you can save it for later. So then if you're working on your main pull request and you notice that you need to fix something first, you can get all your changes, put them away, do a pull request for that thing that you need to fix, have it out, have it merged, and then you retrieve your changes from the shelf and you carry on working. And that's how you do first the auxiliary pull request, then your main pull request, and then the rest of the auxiliary pull requests. Okay? Second step, tell the story, right? So we've got very clearly now the theme of our pull request. We have an understanding of what kind of changes we are going to include and what kind of changes we are going to defer for later. Now we need to present those changes in a nice, coherent way. Now, if you've read a book before, which I'm sure you have, or if you've seen a film before, which I'm sure you have, you will notice that events are presented in a logical, sequential way, right? Sometimes people go artistic and they jump forwards and backwards in time, and that can look good, but it's very difficult to get it right, and very often it just confuses the audience. So then it's very important that your changes are presented in a nice, logical, sequential way. Yes. What that means is, first of all, that you need to have multiple commits, each of them with a nice message, like this. This is just an example, right? You need to avoid things like putting all your changes in one commit. Even more, the more commits that you have, the clearer it's going to be for the reviewer to see your work and to see your progress and your thinking. So for instance, if we're trying to provide a pull request, this would be an example of a bad commit history because it doesn't tell me much. Implement changes. Okay, you could have left it blank. It doesn't tell me anything. This would be an example of a nicer commit history. You know, by reading this, I can get an idea of what you're trying to do and how. Okay, so I can see first you change the return type, then you add the capability to process multiple items. Okay, so probably what is happening here is that there is a particular method that used to return a single item. But now we need to make it so we return multiple items. So that's why we're changing the return type, and we're changing the capability to process multiple items, etc. So before reading the code, just by having a nice commit history, I can already tell what I'm going to expect. I can already imagine the changes that I'm going to see next. What this is pointing to is that you need to have small commits. How small? That's tricky. That's a bit of an art. I cannot tell you hard rules about how small a commit should be, but I can give you some rough guidelines. For instance, if you need to say "and" in the message, that's probably too big a commit, right? If I'm saying in the commit message, I did this and I did that, that probably means that that should be two different commits. First, you do one thing, then you do the other one. You do multiple things in the same commit. Another RIVE guideline, again, these are rule of thumbs, and it depends a lot on your context, but one way to think about it is no more than 1 hour's worth. You know, if you've been working for 3 days and you put all that into a commit, I am pretty sure that commit is going to be too big, right? So you need to be able to work in small increments and be able to commit your work regularly across your day. And then finally, the most important rule, the golden rule, never break the build. Every commit should pass the build. I should be able to go forwards and backwards in the history and check out any individual commit in your pull request, and all of them should work, right? This is very important. A commit doesn't need to be complete work, but it needs to be correct work. The build always has to pass. If you have a build, if you have a particular commit that breaks the build, that means that either you're putting too little or you're putting too much, or you're not putting the right things in there. But the commit has to build. In a way, you can think of each commit as a mini pull request, right? You see, it's like a chapter in your story. If the pull request is a book, each commit is a chapter in that book. So again, it needs to tell me something about this story and about the logical sequence of events happening in my pull request. Now, that's all about the size. How about the message? This is as important as the size, because if I have the correct side of the message, but the commit the right size of the commit, but the message is not very clear, then the history is not going to be good either. Correct? If I just say things like fix things, change things, improve code, well, okay, I sure hope you're improving the code. Otherwise, why are you doing this? Right? So this is very important. You have to write good commit messages. Now, there are plenty of good resources out there with guidelines about how to write a good commit. And these could be material for an entire talk of its own. So what I like to do is, instead of delving into this too much, I'd like to share with you some of my favorite articles on the topic. These are very well redacted. These are very well written, very well explained with examples of good commit messages and bad commit messages. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at this and take it on board and use these tools to write your commit messages. There's one thing that I'd like to mention though, which is you have tools probably already at hand to help you guess when a commit message is good or bad. I'm going to do an example. This is from Vim or VI, and I am editing a commit messages with Vim. And I'd like you to see something. This is the line. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? I'm going to, excellent, thank you. Thank you for the reply. Yes, you can. So as you can notice, in this first line, the color is orange up until the point where suddenly it is changed to black, right? So Vim is telling me that something is happening at this point, right? I have reached a threshold. That threshold is the threshold defined in GitHub for cutting short a message. So as you can see, this is how it appears then on GitHub. The word suppressed has been eliminated because GitHub has decided that that is too long. So now if I want to see that, I need to click the 3 dots button. right? So even before making the commit, Vim is telling me your commit message is too long. Probably you should be more concise, or maybe you should do fewer things in your commit. Another way in which Vim helps you is, look at this. So now the first line is orange and the rest is black, right? So this is telling me that these two things are going to show differently somehow. So when I push this change into GitHub, this is what happens. The orange text is kind of the description of my commit, or the summary, and the black text is the longer explanation that goes behind. And this only displays if I click this, the 3-dot button, which means the orange text is the little lines that I'm going to have when I see all the commits. And then if at any point I want to know more details, then I can expand to see the black text. This is just an example. This is Vim. Other tools will have something similar. So what I'm saying is, whatever tool you use, whatever tool you prefer, make sure you know how you can use it to leverage and the commit message functionality, and to make sure that you have good commit messages. Finally, this is a bit of an advanced topic, which is interactive rebase. I don't know how many of you have experience with Git, and within Git with an interactive rebase. This is a very powerful tool. You have to be careful though, because it can go wrong very easily, precisely because of how powerful it is. But once you get used to it, and once you get experience with it, it allows you to walk at your pace however you want, and then alter the history however you want. So I'm going to show you an example. Let's say I've been working on a particular feature, and these are my commits, right? Top to bottom. The first one, the one on the top is the first one. The second one is the one that comes next, etc., etc. Okay? And now when I take a look at this, as it turns out, these three are part of my main theme. These three are part of my main pull request. These two are actually improvements that I don't want to include in my main pull request. I want to do as a different pull request. However, because I've been working at my leisure, I now have them intertwined. So Git rebase, interactive rebase, allows you to fix this. Now I'm going to show them in different colors, right? So the blue ones should be one pull request, and the green ones should be another pull request. So one of the many things that the interactive rebase allows me to do is change the order of commits. So in this case, I can just swap those two, the third one and the fourth one, and then suddenly I have all my blue ones first and all my green ones after. And now what I can do is I can create another branch that is just a copy of this one. So I have the same history in two different places. And now again, using interactive rebase, I can go to the first branch, get those commits, and just delete them. And then I can go to the second branch, get those commits, and just delete them. And now I have two independent pull requests, each of them with the changes that I want. And I can raise these two independently. And I am achieving my objective of having one pull request for the main theme and another pull request for some refactoring and improvements. Now, changing the order of commits can be dangerous, because you might not realize that maybe the fourth commit depends on the third one. So then if I swap the order, I might be breaking the build. So one thing you can do, one thing that interactive rebase allows you to do is indicate a command that you want to run after each commit. So when I want to do this, actually what happens is something like this. So then Git, what it's going to do is it's going to apply my first commit and then run the build. And then it's going to apply my second commit and run the build. And then it's going to apply the third commit and run the build. If at any point the run fails, then Git is going to stop and it's going to say, sorry, that commit is broken. And then you can do whatever you want. You can abort the whole thing. You can fix the commit and then carry on. You know, that's up to you. But this is something that can help you make sure that you do this maybe dangerous operation, which is playing with the history, but do it in a safe way. Okay. Again, There is an advanced skill. It might require a full talk to go over Git interactive rebase, but I wanted to give you an introduction to it, so maybe you can check additional resources, because these can be very helpful in trying to make a good, understandable Git commit history for your pull request. Good. So that's it. We've done a pull request. It's very nice. It's very readable. It has a logical, understandable, coherent sequence of changes. Now we give it to someone else, and that person has to review it. Okay. So let's put in that situation. We are now the reviewer. Some colleague has said, hey, I just did this. Could you take a look? And we say, sure. What's the first thing that we need to take into account? Again, empathy. Big bold letters again, right? There is someone who spent hours, maybe days working on something, and they just gave it to us. And let's be honest, reviewing code is not as fun as writing code. Writing code is, it's a very creative endeavor. Reviewing code feels a bit like reviewing someone's homework. So we need to, sometimes we might do it just out of obligation, but we need to take into account that the person did a lot of effort in making the task easy to us, and we need to try to understand their position before we do anything. Okay? In order to do this, what I suggest is the following. You have to put yourself in the writer's shoes. And you can do that by following the following steps. First of all, read the requirements, right? Typically, the person who did this did it because someone required so. Maybe a new functionality had to be added. Maybe a bug had to be fixed. So if there are any kind of documents that specify what needs to be done, any Jira tickets or Trello cards, anything, read those first. Make sure you understand the context. Make sure you understand the objective before you go to review the code. Second, do you have everything clear? No? Ask questions. This could be to anyone. This could be to the person who wrote the bug report. This could be to the business analyst who wrote the requirement. This could be to the original developer who created a feature. You could say, hey, are there any particular gotchas that I should keep in mind when I'm reviewing this? This could be questions to a tester and say, hey, what are the testing requirements for this feature? What kind of things should I take into account when I take a look at this? Make sure you understand the context. And then, before you take a look at the code, take a look at the commit history. Hopefully, the developer who wrote this pull request has made the effort to have a nice commit history. So read that first, because that's going to be a very good introduction to the changes that you are expected to see. Small digression. When I was in uni, I had a teacher that used to say, the sooner you start writing code, the later you finish. And his point was that if you jump into code too quickly, then you haven't given yourself time to really understand the requirements or to do an analysis of the possible edge cases or to come up with a design strategy, etc. So his point was, do all those things first, because otherwise you're going to start writing code, you're going to realize all those mistakes that you make, and you're going to have to rewrite it, and then you're going to be stepping on your own toes, and that's going to take the whole thing longer, right? When it comes to reviews, I believe a similar phrase applies, which is the sooner you start reviewing code, the later you finish, which is why I advocate for first read the requirements, first look at the commit history, first get all this information around the pull request and make sure you have the right context before you start taking a look at changes. Okay. So let's say we've done that. We have a full context. We have an idea of what to expect. Now it's time to take a look at that code, at those changes. I think 3 different strategies you can follow depending on the complexity of the pull request. If we're talking about a small pull request with few changes, maybe you can take a look at all the changes at once. I'm sure that if you're working with pull requests, you have some kind of tool that allows you to see the code differences, the changes in code. So maybe you can just look at everything in one go. If the pull request is a little bit larger and looking at all the changes at once is a bit overwhelming, then check on one commit at a time. Again, hopefully the developer who did this has worked in a nice small increments. So then by checking all the different commits one at a time, you can see their thinking and you can say, okay, first you do this, yeah, I got it. Okay, next, oh, you did this, okay, I got it, etc. And then that way you can review the full pull request in small steps. And then for the more complex cases, what I recommend is check out the code. You can do this in any case, obviously, but it is particularly useful with complex pull requests. Because when you check out the code, there is so much more that you can do. You can run tests, you can change code and see what happens. You can navigate, usually your IDE will have all sort of navigation tools. You click on a method, you go to things that override it, you go to places where it is used, etc. You can better see the context of those changes by seeing the full code and interacting with it. And this sometimes becomes very important because in a pull request, if we use one of these tools that show differences, they only show the differences. And sometimes the key thing in a pull request is not the code that was changed, it's the code that didn't change, right? Maybe someone changed a particular piece of code so an error condition is no longer possible, but they forgot to remove all the places where we are dealing with that error condition, even though we don't need it anymore. If you download the code and navigate, it is much more likely that you will notice those things and you will say, hey, I noticed you didn't change this. Maybe we need to. So that's another thing that you have to take into account. Finally, once you have taken a good look at the code, maybe you've got some ideas. Maybe you've got some thoughts that you want to share with the original person that wrote this. And this is the trickiest part because so far you've been operating on your own. Now is when you're communicating to the original person. Communicating verbally, which is what we are mostly used to, it's relatively easy because there are all sorts of nuances that we can detect, right? If I say something and the other person takes offense, I can usually tell immediately because of their reaction, and then I can fix it. I can say, oh, hold on, I didn't mean any offense. I meant this, sorry. When you're writing comments on a pull request, you lose that. So then you need to be particularly careful with how you phrase things and what you say. I would say the very first thing that you need to take into account before writing a comment is there is a difference between I would do this differently and this is wrong, right? So when you see something and think, this is not how I would do it, that doesn't mean that it needs to be changed. Maybe this other person just has a different way of doing things, and maybe it's not a problem, right? So you need to make sure that whenever you're telling something, it is something worth saying. It is not just you being picky. Another very important thing to take into account, celebrate good code. We tend to think that a pull request is about finding mistakes or about fixing things, or it's just to double check whether they forgot something or if they had something wrong. But it's not just that. Sometimes you want to say things like, you know what? This is a very clever way of fixing this problem. Well done, I like it. Or maybe you learn something new. You realize that someone is using a library that you weren't aware of, and you say, hey, I didn't know you could do this. This is brilliant. It's going to save me a lot of time from now on. Celebrate good code. It's not just about doing a critique. It's all sorts of communication. And the other person is really going to appreciate you telling them, hey, this is great. Thank you for doing it. I learned something today. And then finally, please, don't be this guy. That guy, right? Try not to be pedantic. Try not to be unnecessarily academical. Some things, yeah, maybe they could be better, but maybe it's not a big deal and doesn't need to be mentioned. Now, sometimes you will be not quite sure whether something needs to be mentioned or not. You will see something and think, this is not wrong, but it could be better. Should I say something? Should I not? Well, maybe you can tell it, but tell it that way. you can, in your comment, you can say, hey, I believe this is perfectly fine. We could merge this pull request as it is. But we could also do this, which would have these advantages. So I'd like to know your opinion about it. And that way, you're not presenting things as something that has to be changed. You're just presenting an alternative, but you are respecting at the same time, you're showing respect to the original work of the developer. You're not saying this needs to be changed. You're just saying this is perfectly fine, but maybe there's an alternative. What do you think? It's a conversation. Okay. Make sure that your merge requests or your pull requests are always conversations. Oops. Okay, again, tools. Knowing what to say is one side of the coin. Knowing how to say it is another one. And code reviewing tools have advanced a lot in recent times. So it's a good idea to leverage and make the most out of them. So for instance, use Markdown. If you're talking about classes or you are including code or in your comments and things like that, use the formatting of your code reviewing tool, because that's going to make it more readable for the other person. Again, remember, empathy. We're telling comments to the original writer because we want to help. So you need to write things in the most clear way possible. Markdown helps a lot with that. If you are talking about other tools, other libraries, other pieces of code, other documents, add a link. Because then that way, the person doesn't need to fish for wherever you are talking about. The person can just link on that link and go and say, okay, I see what you mean. Thank you, that's brilliant. And finally, if your tool allows it, not all tools have this, but if your tool does, use the review mode. For instance, GitHub has this thing where you start adding comments, but you can see down here that it says 3 pending comments. Those comments are not visible to the original person until you finally say, yeah, submit the review. And this is very useful because there is nothing as frustrating and disheartening as writing a comment that says, hey, I really don't understand this bit, or I think there is a risk here because la 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 la. And then you realize 10 lines below that actually that risk doesn't materialize because of another condition that you haven't seen yet. So then when you go back to your original comment to delete it because you realize that makes no sense, the original person has already replied and said, no, actually, I covered this already. So then if you have review mode, try to use it to make sure that comments are shared only when you are happy to share them. If you don't have review mode, then if you're the original writer, to try not to address comments until the reviewer tells you, hey, I'm done, can you take a look now? Because that way you're giving them space. You give them some time to make some nice comments, and you give them the opportunity to share things with you only when that person is happy to share things with you. Yes? Now, there's a question that many people ask when talking about pull requests and comments and things like that, which is, clicker. Yes. Why not just picking up the phone? Well, why indeed? In fact, that's a brilliant idea. I mean, particularly these days that we are all working from home, or many of us are working from home, and we are losing that human touch with our colleagues. Picking up the phone is actually a brilliant thing to do, because then you hear the voice, you talk to them, you remember there is a person on the other side. Even more, I would say, if you can do a video conference, that's even better. You can see the faces, you can see, you can have a little bit of small talk, you can have a little bit of banter, you can say, hey, your hair is looking messy, you really need a haircut there. Something like that, you can keep the bond, right? It's easy to forget that there is a person on the other side when you're just communicating through comments in a pull request. And that person has feelings, has emotions, has ideas, and you need to remember that. So sometimes picking up the phone is a great thing to do. However, I will say this. To me, the problem is not the phone itself. Let me rephrase that. Many people want to pick up the phone because they think that having a back and forth through comments is inefficient. And I agree. But to me, the problem is not the fact that you are having a long discussions over an inefficient way. To me, the problem is the fact that there is a long discussion to begin with, right? So if you have this back and forth, this exchange of comments, and you reply to my comment, and I reply to your comment, and back and forth, don't do that. Instead, just bring someone else to the conversation. The moment you realize you're stuck, the moment you realize you're not getting an agreement, then get someone else in the conversation and say, hey, what do you think about this? You know, you are a team. At the end of the day, it's two people involved in the pull request, usually, but don't forget that you are part of the team. It doesn't have to be just the two of you. You probably have some kind of team chat. So you can post a mission in the chat and say, hey, you know, I was reviewing this pull request. This person and I, we're getting stuck. Could we have some other eyes to it? You know, could we have someone else to pull some ideas, and maybe we can find together a way forward? That is a much better motivation, or a much better way, in my opinion, to cut short a back and forth. So that way, you can have good review that is useful to the other person, which makes us reach the end of our talk. So some conclusions that I'd like to highlight. First of all, remote pairing is great, but pull requests can be very useful when you want to achieve asynchronous communication. Pairing requires synchronous communication. Pull requests allows you to work at different times. Empathy is absolutely key to make things work. You have to remember there is a person on the other side that is doing their best to contribute to the team and contribute to the business, contribute to the organization. And then when you're doing a pull request, focus on the story that you're trying to tell. And when you're reviewing somebody else's pull request, focus on how you can improve that story, right? Remember, we are all together in this. It's not about finding mistakes in somebody else's. It's about helping each other and learning from each other. So that's it from me. I believe we have some questions.
Yes, thanks, Abraham. On the questions, apologies to everybody on the webinar. We did have some trolls, some people joining that were asking some offensive questions. I shut down anonymous questions halfway through, but yeah, apologies that they got through. So I've dismissed them, but they still seem to be visible. I'll look at how we can improve that for the future. So Abraham, we've got some got prioritized and upvoted beforehand though. So I had to close it for prioritization and upvoting to try and reduce visibility. So from Martin Randall is asking, what happens if you work in an environment where every pull request must be associated with a ticket, e.g. a Jira ticket?
I don't see a problem with that. Well, let me qualify that statement. It depends. That might be a problem or not, depending on whether anyone is allowed to create Jira tickets. I currently work in an organization where we try to have every pull request associated to a Jira ticket, but then developers can create technical tickets whenever they want. So if you want to do a pull request for refactoring, you just create the ticket and do it. If you're not allowed to do it, then that's a problem. That's an organizational problem, and you need to find a way. Either you propose that technical tickets don't have a Jira ticket associated. That's something that I've seen in some places. So what they write is just no ticket or tech ticket or something like that. Or you request permission to create Jira tickets yourselves for this kind of situation.
Okay, cool. So then we have got another question from Matthias Schilling. So separate PRs for improvements seem to be a bit of an overhead in certain scenarios. Depending on the scope of the PR, do you think, pull requests, do you think using just separate commits would be sufficient to allow the reviewer to stay focused?
It can be. It can definitely be. I mean, these aren't hard rules, right? These are guidelines. These are things to think about. So the main objective of doing a different pull request is making sure that the original pull request is understandable and making sure that we reduce possible noise. What we want to do is make it easy for the reviewer. If the improvement that we are adding is so little or so obvious that is not going to make it confusing, then yeah, you can do it as part of the same pull request.
Cool. And then we've got Damian Sosnowski saying, would you recommend squashing commits when merging a PR? And if so, why?
That is a very interesting topic. I've witnessed very passionate arguments about it. It depends a bit on the wider organizational flow, in my opinion. So I think squashing commits, it's important if you need to be able to easily revert an entire merge request. If you don't squash commits, then you bring in all the commits, which may be fine, you know, and you have the nice longer history there. If you do squash them, then, like I said, if for whatever reason you need to pull back that feature, then you can just revert the squashed commit. So I think both options can be acceptable. It all depends on the needs of your organization. And what I would say is try maybe both approaches for a while. First, you try squashing, then you try not squashing, and you see which ones give you the most pros and cons, depending on your circumstances.
Cool. And Alex Singh asked that same question lower down, so I will move that. And then we have Ali Losha. What are your views when working with DVS systems like Mercurial, where history is immutable?
Well, if history is immutable, then what happens is that you don't have the possibility of doing interactive rebase, which basically lets you play with the history. I used to work with Subversion and CVS, and their history was pretty much immutable. I mean, you could do a revert, but actually reverting just means doing another commit that undoes the changes of a previous one. So in that sense, history is already immutable. I think you can still do all these things. The only thing that you don't have is the possibility for an interactive rebase.
Cool. And another question from Alex, a different Alex this time. So should one rebase master for the storytelling? Most people I work with just pull, so you end up with a lot of commits of pulled master in between the story.
I always say rebase early and often. So I personally prefer rebasing because then, like you said, it doesn't add this extra merging commit. However, rebasing is a relatively new concept in the sense that things like Subversion or you know, other older version management systems didn't have, and there are still many people who aren't used to the concept. If you're not comfortable with rebasing, then do a merge, just pull into it. And if you don't like seeing the commits there, what you can do is, if you are comfortable rebasing and then someone else isn't, which is causing all these merging from master commits, then try to have a sit down with that person and try to coach them into using rebase, or try to understand what their concerns are. You know, usually working together as a team, you can achieve a common outcome.
Cool. And so we've got an interesting one here that I'm going to pull out from William Ribeiro. Can you give some quick tips on how to gracefully deny a PR? So there's some nice empathy from when you're when reviewing pull
Okay.
requests?
So I guess there are many reasons for which you may need to deny a pull request. So I guess the first one is, are you denying it because the functionality that is being provided or the changes that are being provided are not required? Or are you denying it because those changes are required, but the way they have been implemented is something that you are unhappy with? If it is the first case, I think, well, there will be a reason for which you don't want those changes. So then I think you need to explain that and say, look, because of ABC, this is not a priority at the moment, or these classes, which is, or the feature, which is a higher priority, etc. We cannot onboard these changes right now. Maybe we can revisit in the future, and just leave it there. Or if you don't want to leave it open, then you could say, I don't know, the vision that we have for this product is this. We believe these changes deviate from our vision, which is why we're not going to consider them. That's another way of saying. So always, if it is because you just don't want that functionality, then explain why that functionality is not to be included. If it is because the functionality you do need it, but you just don't like the way it has been done, then I think this is the moment where first, you need to have a chat with that person and say, okay, these are the things that I have problem with. How can we find a common design? How can we find a solution that we're both happy with? And maybe even bring in some of the people from the team. So you don't make it a you versus me, or even worse, you don't make it a I don't approve your change. You make it a more democratic and consensus, right? You have different people giving opinions, and then amongst all of you, you probably can have a solution that you're happy with.
That's great.
Thank you.
And so we are at time at 7 o'clock. There's another one here. We'll just take a couple more questions and then close down. So Alex is asking if commits could have been ordered differently. Would you ask as part of the review for the ordering to be fixed?
Interesting. If it is not difficult, then, and if there is a good reason for it, then yes. I mean, I believe that when doing a review, it's very important to be pragmatical, right? It's not, I like it this way. It's more like, I believe this is better because of these reasons, right? If there is a good reason, then I believe it's worth mentioning. But always ask yourself why you're asking something.
Cool. And Alexandros has got a question here. Do you have any tools you would recommend to make reviewing easier? So you mentioned checking out the code, but are there any tools that you could use to do the review along with having all the benefits of the IDE that the IDE gives you?
You can do pair reviewing in the same way that you can do pair programming. You can do a pair review. So you can check out the code and maybe use screen.so or some other tool and call the other person and actually review the code together. So instead of you going through the code, you could bring the other person and say, okay, talk to me. Tell me the story. That's another way to make it easier.
Cool. And there is a last one. Well, so there's one about, can we have the links for the referenced sources in the talk? So we will be, this is from Andrew. So for, we'll be putting the video up on YouTube, and in the description of the video on YouTube, we can put a number of those links in. And then also,
sorry, is this for the articles about how to write good commit messages?
Good question, Andrew. If you are still on, could you put a little message in the chat? So you've asked, could we have the links to the reference sources in the talk? So is that? Oh yes, there you go. I filled enough time for Andrew to say yes.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do.
Excellent. So we'll put those in the YouTube. And Hannah, just last question to close. what would be the best commit message if you forget to commit for a while?
Oh, right. So this there is another tool that I didn't mention, which is with Git and with many IDEs these days, you can do partial commits. So what I would recommend, this gets very tricky and it might require you a few rounds to get it right. But if you haven't committed for a while, what you can try to think is, take a look at all your changes and try to think of ways that you could have committed chunks of it and then do partial commits. A partial commit allows you to even just commit sections of a file as opposed to a complete file. So then that way, even though you have it committed for a while, you can still do small increments.
Great. Okay, so that's all the questions that we had open. Thank you very much, Abraham, for
Great
coming
questions.
and talking today. Yeah, excellent. And thank you, everybody, for attending, and also especially thank you for your patience with the trolls that jumped on the call. We will make some changes to the access for the future, and see if we can put a request in to Zoom to allow us to delete Q&As in case we have any more problems like that. Yeah, and again, thanks again to Abraham for going on through that, and you just never skipped a beat. Brilliant. Well done.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe.